What happens when a wealthy clinic owner trades his suit for scrubs, only to discover the people he trusted are bleeding patients dry. Ronan Vance stood by the window of his office on the 20th floor of the corporate tower, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. Rain hit the glass like ticking seconds, and his assistant's voice still echoed in his head. "You should see this email." Some woman named Zoe Whitmore had written in. A nurse. Her message wasn't angry or dramatic. It was short, polite, but there was something in her words that stuck with him. "I love my job, Mr. Vance. But I think someone at the East Haven Clinic is making decisions that don't feel medical, just money-driven. I thought you'd want to know." Ronan hadn't set foot in any of the 12 clinics since the last expansion. They were all under district managers, and each individual branch had its own manager and billing staff. He'd inherited the company from his father 6 years ago and had been so focused on growing the brand new locations, new partners, new tech that he hadn't looked at the day-to-day in a long time. That email stuck with him for days. Not enough to blow up over, but enough to leave a bad taste. Still, he didn't want to walk in as the boss. People changed when they saw you were the man writing the checks. So, 2 weeks later, Ronan Vance became Ryan, a 38-year-old recently certified medical records assistant looking to fill in on temp work while figuring out his next move. He chose the East Haven Clinic. Not just because of Zoe's email, it was the one clinic he'd never visited, not even at its ribbon cutting. None of the staff had met him, and the manager there, a woman named Karen, had only joined a year ago. He grew out a beard, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and swapped his usual tailored suits for khakis and a blue polo. No one raised an eyebrow when he walked in for his first shift. Ryan, right? The receptionist, a stressed-out 20-something with a headset glued to her ear, barely glanced up. "Welcome to East Haven. Karen's running late, but Zoe can get you set up." A woman in blue scrubs looked up from her computer. She looked tired, but her smile was real. "Hey, I'm Zoe. Come on, I'll show you the ropes." Ronan followed her through the clinic. It was bigger than he expected. 6 exam rooms, a pediatric section, a small lab, and a break room that smelled like burnt coffee. Everything looked clean, functional, but the place had a weird energy, like people were walking on eggshells. "So, you'll be working with me in records," Zoe said, logging into the system. "It's mostly digital now. You'll help with intake summaries, billing flags, and insurance claim tracking. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the place running." Ronan nodded. "Sounds good." For the first few hours, he kept his head down. He didn't want to draw attention. He just watched, listened. Around noon, a patient came up to the front desk, older woman, probably in her 60s. She looked confused, clutching a bill in her hand. "I thought Medicare covered this," she said softly. "I don't understand the extra charge." The receptionist didn't even look at her twice. "You signed the consent form. If you have questions, call your provider." The woman looked like she might cry. Ronan watched her walk out, shoulders hunched, holding a bill she clearly couldn't afford. In the break room, he asked Zoe, "Is it always like that?" Zoe frowned. "Honestly, lately, yeah. Karen changed how the billing codes are used. We're flagging a lot more services as advanced diagnostics, even when they're basic. It racks up the bills." "Is that allowed?" Zoe shrugged. "It's not my call. I just do the intake. But I've had patients come back confused, even angry. I've raised it, but Karen said it's standard practice." That phrase again, money-driven decisions. Later that day, Karen finally showed up. Early 40s, sharp suit, expensive bag, constant phone in her hand. She barely glanced at Ronan. "You the new assistant? Good. We're behind. Double up on claim reviews." She turned to Zoe. "And make sure we're billing everything under Tier 2 unless the diagnosis is crystal clear. We can't afford another bad quarter." Ronan blinked. Tier 2? That was a billing category reserved for complex care. It was also reimbursed at a higher rate and often not fully covered by insurance. He waited until Karen stepped into her office and shut the door. "What's Tier 2 exactly?" he asked Zoe. Zoe hesitated. "It's Not really my place to say. But it means higher costs for the patient. Sometimes unnecessarily. An hour later, Ronan was in the system, reviewing patient records. One after another, he saw its simple checkups flagged as Tier 2. Routine lab tests marked as specialized analysis. And almost every flagged chart had Karen's digital initials stamped on it. He leaned back, his stomach twisting. This wasn't just a few mistakes. This was intentional. And it wasn't just Karen. Beside her digital approval notes, he saw another name appearing over and over. B. Martin. That was the district manager. He'd known Brandon for 3 years. Always seemed sharp, loyal. But now? Ronan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. Not about the clinic. About himself. He'd let this happen. He'd built a company that allowed this to happen. And patients were paying the price. He looked over at Zoe, who was quietly typing notes, her brow furrowed. She'd tried to speak up. And no one had listened. He stood from his chair, heart pounding. Tomorrow he was going to look deeper. Not just at East Haven, but at all 12 clinics. And when he was done, someone was going to answer for it. Ronan arrived early the next morning. The clinic was quiet, the parking lot still half empty, and the air held that heavy stillness before a long day. He sat in his car for a moment, watching the front entrance. The automatic doors opened, and a janitor stepped out with a bag of trash, glancing up at the sky with a kind of bone-deep fatigue Ronan recognized from the years before his father handed him the company. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the waiting room was already starting to fill. A mother with a toddler on her lap. A man in work boots shifting uncomfortably in his seat. A teenager scrolling through her phone, her hoodie pulled tight around her face. None of them looked like they were here by choice. Zoe was already in records, sipping from a paper cup and scanning through patient files. She didn't look up when Ronan walked in, just motioned to the empty chair beside her. "You're early," she said, voice low. Ronan slid into the seat and logged in. Wanted to get ahead on chart reviews. Zoe didn't say anything for a second. Then, without looking at him, she asked, "You ever work in a place like this before?" He kept his eyes on the screen. Close enough. She nodded slowly, then opened a file and began typing. By noon, the clinic was humming, phones ringing, nurses moving between rooms, patients being called. Ronan kept to the record station, but he could hear everything. A receptionist explaining to a man that his insurance didn't cover the panel he'd already had drawn. A nurse trying to calm an anxious parent whose child had developed a rash after a vaccine. The tension in the building wasn't loud, but it was constant, like something pressing down on everyone's shoulders. When Karen arrived, she went straight into her office. Ronan watched as she passed without acknowledging a single patient in the waiting room. She didn't even glance their way. Once inside, the door closed, and within minutes, the printer outside her office started spitting out forms, billing summaries, patient reports, internal memos. Ronan stood. He walked over casually and grabbed one of the printed sheets before it hit the tray. It was a billing directive. Reclassify all blood panels under Code 7B, regardless of complexity. That code was meant for high-risk analysis patients with serious conditions, not routine checkups. He scanned the page again. A note at the bottom read, "Signed off by BM." He folded the sheet and slipped it into his pocket. When he returned to his desk, Zoe leaned over slightly and whispered, "You should keep your head down." He kept his voice quiet. Why? Because she doesn't like questions. And Brandon checks in at least 3 times a week. If they think you're looking into things, you won't last long. Ronan glanced at her. How do you know all this? I've been here for 4 years. I've seen how things shift when corporate starts tightening the screws. It used to be about patients. Now it's about numbers. He didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, because he didn't trust himself to keep his tone neutral. That afternoon, a young nurse named Kayla pulled Zoe aside. Ronan could hear them through the open door of the break room. "I had to override a code today," Kayla said, her voice tight. The chart said Tier 2, but it was just a strep test. "I changed it to basic diagnostic." Karen saw the adjustment. Zoe didn't answer right away. She called me into her office, Kayla continued. Told me if I made another unauthorized change, she'd report me for insubordination. Zoe asked, "Did you tell her why you changed it?" She didn't care. Just said it wasn't my job to decide. That we follow billing protocol, not our gut. Ronan stepped into the hallway before they saw him listening. He walked to the supply closet, pulled the door shut behind him, and sat on an overturned box. His phone buzzed in his pocket, an alert from the corporate dashboard. He ignored it. He needed more than suspicions. More than emotional reactions. He needed evidence. The next morning, he called in from the records room, saying he'd be late. He wasn't. He was at the Westfield Clinic, 40 minutes away. Another site under Brandon Martin's district. He entered as a walk-in patient. Filled out the intake forms under a different name. Asked for a routine physical and basic labs. The visit took under 15 minutes. The nurse was polite, the doctor barely spoke. 2 days later, he got the bill, over $800. Most of it under Tier 2 and Tier 3 codes. Unnecessary, inflated, and identical in system structure to what East Haven was doing. He sat at his kitchen table that night, the paper in front of him. He opened his laptop and pulled up internal access. 12 clinics. 8 showed identical billing adjustments over the last year. All of it signed off under the same oversight Brandon Martin. He closed the screen and leaned back in his chair. This wasn't a rogue manager. This was a systemic issue. Quiet, profitable, and buried deep enough that the patients most affected wouldn't know how to fight it. Back at East Haven the next day, Ronan kept his head down. He watched, listened, took notes. Zoe was quieter than usual. Kayla didn't speak at all. Karen barked orders from her office and barely stepped out except to demand updates. During lunch, Ronan approached the lab technician, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a worn badge. "You've been here a while?" Ronan asked. "Since we opened the doors. Things always been this. Rigid." The man gave a short laugh. "Rigid's a soft word. Last year, we had discretion. Could flag anomalies, recommend retests, ask questions. Now it's checkbox medicine. You treat the chart, not the person." He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. That evening, Ronan requested a printout of the past 6 months' billing records under the alias of preparing an audit. Zoe didn't question it. She handed over the files, said nothing, and went back to work. He took the printouts home. Spent the night highlighting discrepancies. Dozens of them. Simple issues coded as complex. Preventative care marked as diagnostic treatment. Follow UPS billed as new patient evaluations. The next morning, before the clinic opened, Ronan stood outside in the early light and watched the sun rise over the strip mall across the street. He thought about every patient who'd walked through those doors assuming they were being taken care of, who left with bills they didn't understand, who likely never knew they were collateral in someone else's performance metrics. He stepped inside when the doors unlocked, sat at his desk, waited. Karen arrived late again. This time, she wore a bright red jacket and walked straight into her office without a word. By noon, Ronan stood and walked toward her door. He knocked once. "What?" she called. He opened the door and stepped inside. "I need a word," he said. She glanced up from her screen, irritated. "You're the temp, right? I don't take meetings with temps." He shut the door behind him. "You do today." Karen leaned back in her chair, unimpressed. "Close the door," she said without looking up from her monitor. "And make it quick." Ronan stepped in, shut the door behind him, and waited until she finally looked at him. Her expression was flat. She didn't recognize him. "Not yet." "You've been altering billing codes across multiple patient files," he said calmly. "On record. Routinely. You know that's not just unethical, it's fraudulent." She blinked once, then scoffed. "I don't know what you think you know, but I don't take lectures from temp staff. You're out of line." He let the silence stretch. She frowned, slowly setting her pen down. "You're not a temp, are you?" "No." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, one of the many he'd compiled over the past 4 days. He laid it on her desk and opened it to a page marked with red tabs. These are the adjustments you signed off on. All of them misrepresent the care provided. They inflate the charges, push patients into uncovered categories, and in at least 3 cases, resulted in collections being triggered within 2 weeks of the visit. Karen didn't respond. Her eyes flicked to the page, then back to him. I've seen your signature on documents at 7 other clinics, he continued, all falling under Brandon Martin's oversight. Which means this isn't just you. Still, she said nothing. I've already pulled the data, he said. You want to explain it, or do you want to wait until I bring this to the compliance board? Now her posture changed. She sat forward, her jaw tight. You don't understand how these clinics stay open. You think insurance reimbursements just roll in? We're already short 4 nurses this quarter. We're running on skeleton staff. The only reason we're not cutting hours is because we're billing to keep the lights on. That's not your call to make. No, she snapped. It's Brandon's. You think I came up with this? He sent the directive. He said if we didn't meet targets, we'd be flagged for review. Do you even know what happens when a clinic gets flagged? They close.
Fast.
And everyone here is out of a job.
He didn't respond.
Not yet. And don't act like you're above this, she added. You're wearing a different name, but you've been around long enough to know how this system works. I know exactly how it works, he said. Which is why I'm going to fix it. Karen stared at him for a moment, and something in her face shifted, not fear, not guilt, but resignation. You want to burn it down, go ahead, she said. Just don't pretend you're saving anyone. She reached for her phone, but he was already out the door. He didn't go back to records. He walked straight past the front desk toward the exam rooms. Kayla was finishing up with a patient, setting down a clipboard outside the door. When she saw him, her expression tensed. I need you for a moment, he said. She hesitated, then followed him into the break room. Zoe was there, pouring coffee into a paper cup. She glanced up, sensing the shift in the air. Ronan closed the door behind them. I'm not Ryan, he said. My name is Ronan Vance. I own this clinic. Neither of them spoke. He continued, I came in undercover because I got a message from someone who cared enough to say something was wrong. That person was right. And what I've seen here isn't just a problem, it's a breach of everything this company was built on. Zoe looked stunned. Kayla's arms were crossed tightly, her face unreadable. I've confirmed that billing fraud has been happening here and at multiple locations. It's being driven by Brandon Martin and enforced by managers like Karen. Kayla stepped back slightly. So what happens now? I'm pulling every record from the last year. Every misfiled claim. Every improper code. I'll be forwarding the data to internal compliance and, if necessary, the state board. Zoe's eyes widened. You're not going to try to keep this quiet?
No.
I won't cover for people who've built their careers on exploiting patients. And I won't let good staff be punished for trying to do the right thing. She nodded once slowly. Kayla didn't speak. I'll need your help, he said. Both of you. We'll need to document everything we can before Brandon tries to interfere. Kayla looked at Zoe, then back at him. If you're serious, then yeah. I'm in. Zoe didn't hesitate. Me too. The next hour moved quickly. Ronan called for a temporary shutdown of new appointments for the day. Citing technical system maintenance, the clinic stopped accepting walk-ins, and the last of the morning patients were rescheduled. Karen tried to intervene, but Ronan made it clear her access was revoked. Effective immediately. She left the building without a word. By late afternoon, Ronan had already reached out to legal. Internal counsel advised him to move fast if Brandon caught wind of the investigation before the company's compliance team could secure the data. There was a risk he'd start wiping records. Ronan didn't wait. He drove back to headquarters and walked into the legal department himself, handing over the folders and digital logs he'd compiled. This all traces back to Brandon Martin, he said. And I want a full audit of every clinic he's touched. They didn't ask questions. The documentation was thorough. Names, dates, billing codes, patient impacts all clearly laid out. By the following morning, Brandon was suspended pending investigation. But that wasn't the end of it. Ronan returned to East Haven before opening hours. Zoe was already there, sitting at her desk, typing up a report. She looked up as he walked in. "You didn't waste any time," she said. "I couldn't." He sat across from her. "I'm putting together a new oversight structure," he said. "We're going to implement third-party audits for billing. Every clinic. Every quarter." She nodded. "That's a good start. I also want to bring in someone to provide staff training, ethics, compliance, patient-first care. Not just once. Ongoing." Zoe hesitated, then said, "You'll need more than training. People are tired. Burned out. Afraid of speaking up." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm giving every clinic a direct escalation line to my office. No more getting filtered through regional management." She looked at him, eyes steady. "You're going to need people who actually believe in this," she said. "Not just ones who say the right things. I plan to start by promoting the ones who already do." She didn't respond, but her expression softened. That afternoon, Ronan stood in front of the entire East Haven staff.
No suites. No cameras.
Just him, in the same clothes he'd worn all week. "I came here under a false name," he said. "Because I wasn't sure who I could trust. That's on me." The room was quiet. I saw things that shouldn't have happened. Patients being overbilled. Staff forced to stay silent. Decisions being made for profit, not care. He paused. "That ends now." He laid out the changes: oversight, whistleblower protections, restructuring of clinical management. Karen would not be returning. Neither would anyone who had participated in the fraudulent billing. There would be turnover. There would be disruption. But there would also be accountability. And for the first time in a long while, the people in that room looked like they believed it. After the meeting, Zoe pulled him aside. "There's a nurse from the night shift who's been working double weekends," she said. "She's never said anything, but she's been covering gaps for months. If you're looking for someone to lead transition here, she's the one." Ronan wrote down her name. He had a long road ahead. 12 clinics. Dozens of staff. Hundreds of patients who deserved better. But at least now, he knew where to start. A week later, Ronan returned to East Haven under his real name, with no disguise, no borrowed badge, and no pretense. He walked through the front doors at 7:30 in the morning, just as staff were starting to arrive. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the scent of antiseptic clung to the air like always, but something felt different. Not lighter, just quieter. Alert. Watchful. He hadn't expected gratitude. He wasn't here for applause. But he noticed the way some heads turned when they saw him, the way conversations halted mid-sentence. There was a tension now, but it wasn't the same kind that had hung in the air during his first week undercover. This wasn't fear of being watched. It was anticipation of what came next. He met Zoe near the record station. She was flipping through a clipboard, her expression unreadable. "You're not hiding behind glasses today," she said without looking up. "No need anymore. I figured you'd be too busy to come back." "I'm not here to check on how people feel about the changes," he said. "I'm here to see if they're actually working." Zoe handed him the clipboard without a word. It was a revised intake form, simpler, clearer, with coded services broken into plain language. There were also small additions: an explanation of billing categories, a checkbox for patients to request clarification, and a direct contact for post-visit questions. "Patients are asking more questions now," she said. "A few are confused, but nobody's gotten angry yet. That's something." "We also had 3 walkouts yesterday," she added. "One of them didn't want to wait. The other 2 left when we told them what their insurance wouldn't cover." He didn't flinch. "You think they would have stayed if we'd padded the codes?" "I think they would have paid bills they didn't understand and probably wouldn't come back." Ronan nodded. "Then we're doing the right thing." She hesitated, then said, "We're trying to." He couldn't argue with that. Trying would have to be enough for now. He spent the next 2 hours moving through the clinic, not as a CEO conducting a surprise inspection, but as someone listening. He spoke with the night nurse Zoe had mentioned, a woman named Raina, who didn't say much, but carried a quiet authority. She walked him through the overnight routine, showed him the gaps she'd been covering, and handed him a list of supplies they'd been short on for months. I'm not asking for more staff, she said. But if you want people to stay, we need to stop running like this is a temporary emergency. He reviewed the list, then asked, if I gave you the authority to reorganize the night shift and approve overtime for the next 60 days, what would you do first? I'd split the shift into 2 staggered blocks, she answered immediately. It'd give us overlap without burning everyone out. And I'd bring Kayla in to help with onboarding. She knows the system better than anyone since the changes. He gave her the green light before she walked away. In the break room, he found the lab tech sitting alone, staring at a half-eaten sandwich. The man didn't look up as Ronan entered. You're still here, Ronan said. Didn't think I would be? I thought you might have taken a break. Don't have time for that. Ronan leaned against the counter. You ever consider running a lab instead of just working in it? The man finally looked up. You offering? I'm asking if you'd be willing to build a better version of what we've got. He folded the wrapper around his sandwich. Only if I can pick the equipment we replace first. Half of it's overdue for calibration. Make me a list. That was how Ronan spent his day, one conversation at a time, not fixing everything, but handing over small pieces of authority to people who had already earned it. Not promotions, not applause, just trust. He knew that wouldn't solve what months of bad leadership had damaged, but it was movement. And movement, he realized, was more valuable than promises. Back at headquarters, the compliance team had already completed their preliminary audit. 7 clinics showed consistent patterns of inflated billing. 3 managers were under formal review. Brandon Martin had tendered his resignation the day prior, after being presented with the compiled documentation. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but Ronan didn't need it to be. His name would be attached to every flagged record, and the state board had already begun their inquiry. The legal team had warned Ronan about exposure, about the risk of lawsuits, about reputational damage. He told them to prepare anyway. If patients came forward, they'd be met with transparency and resolution, not denial. Financially, the company would take a hit. They'd projected year-end profits based on the inflated billing practices. With those reversed, revenue would shrink. Bonuses would be affected. Investors would ask hard questions. Ronan had already scheduled the calls. He took the elevator to the top floor of headquarters late that afternoon. The executive suite felt colder than he remembered, too clean, too quiet. He sat at his desk and stared out the window, watching the traffic far below filter through intersections like blood through arteries. His father's portrait still hung on the wall. A younger man in a navy suit, arms folded with confidence. Ronan had stopped noticing it years ago. He stood and took it down. Not in anger, not in shame, just understanding. That version of leadership wasn't what the company needed anymore. He replaced it with a framed print of the new intake form. It looked plain, unremarkable. But it represented something real, a return to clarity, to consent, to care. The next morning, he met with the other 11 clinic managers at headquarters. He didn't lecture. He didn't threaten. He gave them data, showed them the numbers. Then he told them what was changing. Billing would no longer be controlled by clinic managers. Oversight would rest with a centralized compliance team reporting directly to his office. All patient complaints would be reviewed within 72 hours. Every clinic would be assigned a rotating audit schedule. Non-compliance would result in immediate review, not warnings, not coaching. Some managers looked relieved. Others looked cornered. No one argued. After the meeting, he found Zoe's original email and forwarded it to himself, then printed it out and pinned it to the wall beside his desk. Not as a warning, as a reminder. One voice had been enough to change the course of 12 clinics. He checked in with Zoe that afternoon, not at East Haven, but via video call. She looked tired, but not worn down. Just busy. Focused. We're getting questions about the changes, she said. Some patients are asking why things cost less now, if they were billed correctly before. Tell them yes, he said. And if they want to file a dispute, send them to us. We'll review every case. She paused. You're going to lose money. I already did. She didn't argue. Before they ended the call, she said, we had a patient come back today. Elderly woman. She was one of the ones who walked out a few weeks ago. What happened? She had the same procedure. We billed it correctly this time. She paid $30 out of pocket, smiled, and said we'd earned her trust back. Ronan nodded once. That's the only metric I care about right now. He ended the call and sat in silence for a long while. The noise of the city filtered in faintly through the glass. Somewhere below, people were walking into clinics bearing his name, trusting they'd be treated with dignity. That trust had been fractured. Now, piece by piece, it was being rebuilt. Not by policy, not by force, but by listening to the people who had been ignored the longest and giving them the power to do what was right, even if it wasn't easy. Especially then.